So I've got 3 daisies sketched on the watercolour paper and indigo on my brush in a very concentrated and thick wash. And now I'm painting around the edges of the petals, taking care to keep the shape of the petals, and now adding more water to that wash will keep it nice and free and loose. And I've added some phthalo blue into the wash there just to change the colour slightly. And a big brush with lots of water on it will enable that pigment to flow, keeping it nice and loose. So a little bit more indigo in against the edge of that flower and some ultramarine blue. Adding water on to allow the pigment to flow. And a bit more indigo going in there to keep that contrast nice and deep. So as I go towards the right hand side of the flowers, I'm not adding dark pigment onto my brush. It's very watery and I'm making it quite suggestive with the brush strokes, not too much detail. And now bring that with a smaller brush, bring the pigment from the background into the gaps in between the petals. Keeping the brush strokes nice and lively, not too much detail, and some splatters into the background. Now the aim of the centres is to try and get some feeling of shadow and light, which will give form to the centres of the flowers. So lemon yellow is painted on the top of the centres and raw sienna along the bottom, which creates a sort of a shadow to the centres. If you have hard lines, then break them up with a damp brush and then splatter some water into the background, which pushes the pigment away and you get the suggestion of flowers in the background. So with a rigger brush, I'm now painting some green, dark green stems. Now, with the rigger brush, a few dry brush strokes of indigo in between the petals will really show off the right-hand side of the flowers against a white background. I don't want to paint in between every petal, but just these flicky brush strokes are really lovely and loose and suggestive of the flower sitting against the background. So now with a pale grey, I'm hinting at a shadow beneath the centre of the flower. And to avoid that hard edge, I'm just softening it with a damp brush. And back to that indigo. Not too much on the rigger brush because you don't want it to splurge out across the daisy centre. So just fairly concentrated indigo and put it as a line along that centre flower. Now these bits are quite important. It's very pale grey now, and we are painting in a sense what are shadows in between the petals, and they really do help to define the flower, the petal shapes and the flower shape. We don't want to paint all of them, but just a few. It just helps with the feeling of bright sunshine on the flowers. Back to that indigo on the rigger brush, and now these little marks are the very centre where the petals meet the middle of the flower, and they're just tiny little gaps in between the petals. This is what this is suggesting. What I love about this little sketch, it's just an impression of rather than a very detailed painting. It's trying to capture the essence. if you see any more areas that just need a little bit more definition, then indigo on the rigger brush will be your friend on this. And now a few splatters of titanium white into the background. These do fade away, so you might have to, as it's wet, you may have to sort of repeat that again or add dry marks in between. And a few more dark stems with the rigger brush. A few more splatters. And now's the time that we can make any minor corrections that we want to. This petal shadow here to me seems just a little bit dark, so with a clean damp brush I'm just lifting out that pigment. And a few more darker lines in between those right hand petals. Tiny little bit more, few more dots in the shadow area of this flower centre. More stems.